the quality again, the meaningfulness of life when you're chasing something outside of your own, say, self-egoistic preference system. And you are sharing the joy and the sadness and just the voyage of going there towards trying to fulfill that dream.
Hey everybody, Tanner here with WAGMI Ventures. On today's episode, we have Tomer Afek, co-founder and CEO at Spacemesh. For anyone who's new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast where we do snapshots with interesting founders from across Web3. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. But for now, let's get into it with Tomer from Spacemesh. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm here today with Tomer Afek, co-founder and CEO at Spacemesh. Tomer, how's it going today?
Good. Happy to be here and generally thrilled. Spacemesh Genesis is in 2 weeks after 5 years of work.
Oh, wow.
I can imagine working on something so long before even putting it in the water once. And therefore, the excitement accumulates.
Definitely. Well, I know we got a lot to talk about here, so let's jump in. I think as a place to start, I would love to learn more about your journey thus far, kind of beyond just the headlines of like what you've been up to professionally. Like you bring to the space a really interesting kind of philosophical perspective, not philosophical in the sense of like talking about ideas, which I feel like a lot of people do, but you're engaging with kind of traditional philosophy even at times, like bringing in Wittgenstein to conversations and all kinds of interesting thinkers. So I guess I'm curious, both the intellectual journey and also the philosophical journey. Like, what does that journey look like leading up to starting Spacemesh?
Right. Thanks for asking this. I think that the first decade of my professional career has been spent as a venture capitalist. I've joined as, bathroom cleaner for a VC and climbed my way up until I became a partner at a fund. And I've noticed that during that decade, I mostly noticed that the successful people are not necessarily those who are obtaining the traits you would want to copy. And I would then, because investment is somewhat of a lonely occupation, you are making analysis in your mind. The next step I did after doing that for 10 years was to jump into founding a company. And I immediately felt the difference in what the job requires and the amount that you are being viewed by your colleagues, not as you perceive yourself to be. And this friction with reality is really conducive to, learning about yourself. I think I was always somewhat too smart for my own good. I've was under the impression that what it cost me to get to a point where I'm financially autonomous and can do whatever I choose is too high of a price. And I believe that I've found my calling in reducing the insecurities and the fear that are baked into our existing system so as to allow more people the financial freedom to choose what they want to do as opposed to do what they must.
Love it. Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of on that point, I'm curious, you've written some about this subject, but kind of putting the question to you more directly, like, what makes a money system a good system? What are the blind spots that aren't being addressed with respect to fairness? You've kind of alluded to some dynamics there already, but more broadly, like how do you think about these subjects?
Yeah, without getting too deeply into the philosophical, I believe that science is changing its record now. And with that change, there is a realization that a lot of what we think is out there, existing regardless of us watching it, is in fact not something that owns some intrinsic properties regardless of us watching it. And the main idea that is to be understood from that whole paradigm shift to your specific question is the fact that a money system has two roles. One is the facilitating trade, what we are acquainted with very well, but the other role is basically it signals to us what desirable traits are now most befitted and are most increasing fitness as of right now in an ever-changing landscape. So if you understood everything, the qualitative aspect of a money system is basically the extent to which it's both freely and accurately maps and signal out the most, say, collectively selected for traits and virtues. And this, again, goes back to achieving fitness with an ever-changing subatomic landscape. So if all this goes over your head, then what you need to understand in order to really summarize it is that whoever you give your money to shapes the reality we all share. And I would thereby say that the good game to play with money is to aspire for it to be as accurate as possible, to have every individual on the map basically owns how much they truly deserve with respect to the fairness of the contribution that they've created. And the accuracy, the way we can show what are truly the desirable traits right now and not what something that we got stuck on in the past or anything like that. This is the qualitative aspect of the money system. And just to wrap this up, the more sensors you have reporting subjective, stance on the map, the more accuracy the map achieves, the higher the velocity and the integration of information can be done. And so the ability to create a money system which is serving the good game, the game that we all ought to be playing, of trying to map together what traits we ought to copy, this game is contingent on an accurate and fair money system.
Yeah, super interesting. Okay, so these animating ideas, you mentioned you've spent 5 years getting to this point. In light of some of these animating ideas, like why did you decide to spend so many years on Spacemesh, and how does it sort of operationalize some of these ideas?
Right, so I think the sentence that got me hooked to the industry was the Satoshi Nakamoto's vision of magic internet money that everybody can join via mining from home. I think I immediately mined Bitcoin when I could back in the days, and as you know, it became unfeasible for home miners to expect to be profitable mining Bitcoin as a result of the mining industry basically becoming industrialized. And so that specific experience as a user led me to query what would be a more fair protocol, what would be a protocol that would allow new joiners to come at any point and basically to be treated as fairly as the bigger whales. That was the first motivation that brought me into the industry. I think two more motivations to do Spacemesh besides treating fairly the home miner comes to bear. The one is the proof of work being suboptimal resource due to its environmentally demands. And one must understand this is not an efficiency issue with Bitcoin. Even if you make Bitcoin more efficient, the energy is basically the way the protocol must keep secure. And The other thing is a paper that is called selfish mining, which your listeners might probably are familiar with, which proves that Bitcoin is not in effect 100% incentive compatible. There are times where the most honest thing and the most profitable thing to do are not the same. And if everybody will choose to do, in fact, selfish mining, then the protocol will be in big problems. Why does all this matters? It matters because of the security. So if you are taking into account that you have, like, say, a security requirements of 50% of the miners need to be honest. And now you are putting your quote-unquote honest people in front of a dilemma whether to be rational or honest, right? So now what you're asking basically is 50% must be honest even if it contradicts the rationality. And this is a harder assumption to swallow. So to the extent to which you can prove that the protocol is 100% incentive compatible, then 50% honest remains, in fact, the demand and not something higher like people that might choose to act in against to their self-interest. So these are the motivations. This is what brought us to basically imagine what would be a mining software that could run on basically weaker PCs and that would not be risking the user with expenses you cannot meet, and that would not put the user in a disadvantaged position against those who are enjoying economies of scale, buying a lot of hardware and so on. And as it turns out, it's a really difficult problem to solve. And it's been solved by us by a combination of many consensus protocols, one of which is proof of space-time, which takes care of the eligibility part, one of which is the block mesh, which makes sure that the latency remains low, because if the blocks gets too big, the latency within every hop, as you know, becomes larger. So similar to, I don't know, the original idea of BitTorrent or whatnot, there is a way to send large files by breaking them down to a million smaller pieces and sending them over the network. So they end up arriving at the other end faster. That's sort of like why it took so long and why it's important to insist that the money system would remain incentive compatible, to the extent that, again, the most honest thing and the most profitable thing are always aligned. And secondly, to break away from this tendency that the more bigger players join, the less chances you have to win a reward, up until a point where years go by without you winning anything.
Yep. Super interesting. So maybe talk us through a little bit more what you already kind of started, which is sort of maybe some more of the technical aspects of the protocol. I think that might be an interesting direction to explore.
Yeah, for sure. So in order to basically achieve a money system that is incentive compatible in a provable fashion and that is not raceful, so there is no leader and so on, we had to make a radical break from traditional DLT protocols. And the heart of Spacemesh is a protocol we call the tortoise. The tortoise is received its name because it's slow and determined and robust. And this is basically a protocol where Spacemesh is a block mesh. I take a step back with your permission. Spacemesh is a block mesh, meaning that there are ordered layers and you know when those layers will be in advance. And blocks are created basically independently and simultaneously by many nodes within each layer. And all the valid blocks get into the layer. There is no competition between these blocks and so on. However, a malicious party might send a block not in a timing where 50% will see it in time and another 50% will see it outside of time. And this is why this simple protocol of voting is not sufficient. And we have something called the hair protocol, which is a fast, one-shot Byzantine agreement to agree on only this layer and only the valid blocks for this layer. And if I am a miner in layer 1000, I don't need to express my opinion about the validity of blocks in layer 3, 4, 5, and so on, but rather I count votes and I only look into the contents of the one layer that I'm currently busy with. And this combination of the hair is something that is fast and can only achieve consensus on the current layer, and the tortoise, which gives you stronger and stronger confidence in the validity of block over time in the same fashion that Bitcoin is doing that. So history becomes harder and harder and harder to change. The combination of these gives you something very unique. It gives you the robustness and the security of basically Bitcoin, but it allows you to function like Ether and to basically process a lot of information and to be highly composable and so on. So basically, if you want, I will conclude by explaining that there is what sets your validity, what sets your eligibility to participate in the protocol is the proof of spacetime, which we didn't discuss here. So there is a unit of spacetime, 250 gigabyte over 2 weeks. That's a unit of spacetime. And if you want to participate in the protocol, you basically download a simple client. We have one for Mac, one for Windows, one for Unix, and so on. You do next. It's a very simple installment. You choose the drive that you want to store someplace. Initially, the protocol will fill that drive with cryptographic garbage. Once that garbage is occupied, the protocol remains, basically goes back to an idle mode, don't do almost anything. And then every 2 weeks, you are providing proof that you're still storing. Every epoch, which is every 2 weeks, you're providing a proof, activation transaction, which proves that you're still storing the information. This is done by asking you a challenge, which is random stuff about the storage that you're storing. And because it's so random, it makes no sense for you to calculate those random questions on the fly, but rather you have to store it in order to be able to answer this challenge every 2 weeks. And once you publish an ATX in a given layer, basically in a given epoch, you are eligible to participate and to receive rewards starting the epoch after that and onwards. So the main advantages of this, as I'm explaining, structure is that it achieves the advantages of proof of work with respect to being entirely a commodity, with respect to being able to self-heal when a situation was when the security assumptions been violated temporarily, all the advantages of having a scarce resource like Bitcoin. But again, as I explained, we also have the fairness, the linearity in rewards, the everybody can join, which is lacking from Bitcoin and was basically implemented in Ethereum, but while running on a proof of stake, which we can discuss, but it's got a lot of the inherent issues that our current world order has. The more money you have, the more influence you have on the decision making, and this is something we seek to replace.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear such an egalitarian kind of vision sort of built out and expressed in these ways. I find that really, really interesting. So, maybe just a couple more.
Sorry to interrupt you, but if you think about, you keep on like resonating with the political stuff. So I want to say something about that.
Yeah.
I think that when you realize that government can't provide solutions which are forever, right, and that solutions require adaptation to the circumstances, to the environment, and so on, and you start to conceive a political system of, I don't know, some cantons like, or groups that are deciding upon themselves, and then something like a bottom-up best governance emerges on top, and you can think about something like a GitHub, right? GitHub for governance, where every group starts where the last group ended. So the one thing I want to point your listeners to is the Elinor Ostrom's 8 Principles, and the importance of implementing those 8 principles within groups and between groups, so as to further our vision that smaller groups, once coordinated, can outcompete and even create, undreamt of prosperity to participants by being, willing to re-examine and listen truly to the other side and so on. Some things that we struggle with at the moment.
Sure. Yeah, that's fascinating. So kind of on that point, one thing jumped out from an essay you wrote as especially interesting, or it kind of seemed like a bit of a linchpin between, some of the political stuff that I do find very interesting and some of those animating ideas, and also kind of the technical aspect you were just covering a bit ago, where it was the line, an architecture that can serve as a foundation stone for a humanity that is consciously evolving itself. I'm curious if you wanted to talk a little bit more about kind of what I perceive to be that linchpin, or I could totally be wrong too, but if you just wanted to talk a little bit more on that.
Yes, with pleasure. I think that the main realization that groups can create values that any of their individuals can never dream of by collaborating in a particular fashion is very appealing to me. I believe that once we learn the art of coordination and collaboration, we are able to work less, enjoy life more, and as I've explained, we have higher confidence to chase our felt sense of potential because we've achieved some economical autonomy, which allows us to at least make the first few stabs at this dream that we have and pursuing some road. And this, in my opinion, and Elinor Ostrom won the Nobel Prize for economy, even though she's not an economist, on that. So there is a realization that is very pervasive in the scientific world, which is yet to proliferate into, say, something like the governance and the way we manage our affairs. And that is that now you do this because I say so, the violence of it is unbearable. Okay, and people deserve to work in a place where they feel that their opinion matters and that they are passionate about achieving whatever this group is chasing. And all I want to say is that there will be pioneering of this landscape, of these meshed groups. And I think the pioneers will have to sacrifice. They will have to do things for the vision to come to reality without necessarily seeing immediate fruits or without being competitive in the fruits with something else. But I believe that once bootstrapped, this will provide ultimately the main source of employment for the younger generation. They will work in collaborative, voluntarily, communities or tribes, and they will seek to usher in the change they dream about in the world, and they will receive candid feedback from their colleagues about what they're doing good and what they're doing bad. And just, this candor, this holding you on track towards your goal, the way you've expressed it to your friends and so on, that is very much missing today. I think we don't have groups that support us in this fashion, especially the younger generation, when they are considering what they ought to do when they grow up, quote unquote, and stuff like that. That they have a felt sense of potential, but they are basically being told by their parents to, ignore it and do what's wise. And the quality, the meaningfulness of life when you're chasing something outside of your own, say, self-egoistic preference system, and you are sharing the joy and the sadness and just the voyage of going there towards trying to fulfill that dream. This is the change, and I think this change will be complementary to begin with our existing governance system. And as we see, they need help. They are unable to respond fast to things like Corona. And we can, by means of, group sharing, we can do better, and we can position this at first as something like helpful endeavor to assist in governance efforts which carry their own rewards. And I believe the next functionality of Tribeverse is to lean hard against the big polluters, against those who are doing some evil things and are getting away because they're highly profitable or something like that. So that the capacities of Tribeverse will increase over time from just being nice to the people that are doing it and allowing them to chase their dreams into something that has impact on the greater reality that we live in, but not immediately for sure, and maybe not even in our own lifetime.
Love it. Tomer, maybe two last questions here. So first question, what advice would you have for founders building in the Web3 space? Say you're talking to yourself as you're getting into kind of the blockchain and crypto world. Like, what would you want to impart to yourself at that point?
Oh, I so love this question. I think the first thing you do as a victim of the normative tyranny is you say something like, I want to have a workplace where everybody feel important and everybody do what they choose, and you end up with something like a kumbaya. Okay? And this is dysfunctional. And so this is my advice to, the first advice to people is to make sure they understand that if the load falls unevenly on the team members, this has a toll. And people are programmed to compare what they contribute to what other people are contributing in a subconscious fashion. So if you will not implement Elinor's HCDP, if you will not make sure there is proportion between the reward and the load and the risk that one is taking, then this will hurt you at the long run. I think the other advice, I think, for building in public is something like striking balances. And I will give you two examples. I think that my main challenge over the years was basically research is a creative process by nature. And it fluctuates and turns, right? And then if your dev team is working too close to the developers will find themselves throwing away a lot of the code that they've built because research had a flux or something of that nature. If you build too slowly, you say, okay, I'm going to wait until they finalize every remaining detail and only then I'm going to start to develop, then also way too slow. So my advice to people is to find a worthy goal, not something, minor and unimportant, and then to slowly and carefully iterate between building and research. And what needs to be understood is that research is finalized only after you build something. So the researchers can search in their mind only so far. And then when you actually build it, this is when the remaining 3% of the questions pop up. And this is when the final hard things are being decided. So that kind of striking of balance is important. I think the way to work in full transparency and full honesty and full egalitarian way is to have a protocol and to be kind of religious about the protocol, okay? Because if everything goes kumbaya, then you lose really it becomes highly entropic. And if you want to sustain coherence, if you want to sustain egalitarianism, but you want to, keep coherence, keep this thing working. So what I find is that there is a way of traveling around an issue, understanding all its perspectives, and then striving towards something which is a rough consensus. And this process on its own, just exploring all ins and out and aiming up at a form, like a vague shape of a solution that would. And now, not doing backwards these dialogues, okay? Now we are settled on this shape, and now we're only asking questions about this shape. And in this fashion, you are able to iteratively explore something. I think the last tip I want to give here is about reflexivity and reflection. At the beginning, you think, okay, wow, these are all so smart people. They will correct themselves and improve on the job. And every time we did some kind of a reflection process on how we're doing as a team, could we improve? Those are so much more important than meets the eye or intuitively grasped. So just seeking to improve together and sticking to some routine that will give you the context, right? The place for the emergent things to occur. This is, again, things that I've learned with a lot of blood and tears, and I'm happily sharing so that people can do better than me onwards.
Love it. Tomer, what is your team working on right now, and what's the best way for people to follow along on your journey?
Yeah, brilliant. So I think the best thing to do right now is to prepare to be mining on Genesis, because mining in Genesis is going to be attractive. And much like Bitcoin, there is a decay function. So it decays way slower than Bitcoin. So there is food for miners for hundreds of years to come. Nonetheless, more food earlier rather than later. And the best way to prepare for Genesis is to try downloading the software, taking a small piece of your drive, filling it with a cryptographic bar. It's basically participating in the testnet right now. And then as I said, on May 9th, we publish the quote-unquote golden key or something like that, something that we could not have known in advance. Why is that necessary? This is the proof that the Spacemesh team or friends could not have began to mine earlier than the rest, because this information said they check some of the existing Bitcoin last block, right? So something Spacemesh couldn't have known in advance, and as a result, fairness is again maximized. So we all start at the same level playing field, and we mine together Genesis. And then, after 2 blocks, which is basically an epoch, which is 2 weeks, you will start to receive your rewards every 2 weeks for as long as you don't close this client. And that's all there is to it at the beginning. On top of this, within 6 to 8 months, there will come smart contract support, which again should follow the Spacemesh agenda of just reducing the barriers to entry and making it accessible to more people and not just to the, elite privileged few, and this means making something more quote-unquote idiot-proof, more accessible to the broader public, and also thinking onwards about DAO participation and DAO governance and how this can replace the existing work. Then again, all these we take into account must be done in an, really easy to use kind of a fashion, and that has its toll on basically the way we've constructed our smart contract language, but that's for another conversation. Chat.spacemesh.io, and this is a Discord server. We're all hanging out there. Please come join us.
Love it. Tomer, thank you so much for the time. This is really, really interesting stuff. I really liked getting to hear obviously the thinking behind the work and then more about the work itself. So congratulations on the exciting news coming up, and I'm excited to follow along myself on the journey. So have a good rest of your week here and take care.